Hello everyone, here back again with another pretty big example of a prime war strategy that we see from many of today's modern militaries here. I know on this channel we really try to review them and get down to what makes the best military, how to fund it, and why some are just more successful than others. Going through some pretty historic battles in the process and provide a bit of a historical context to them. Well, this simulation here today really captures a lot of things that I think are very important when it comes to war strategy, mainly developing an army that can see all and be all, even against some of the enemy's hardest bombardments that were just brought up and up again through great, frankly, progression on their part here. So this is capturing here the historic battle of the resort in 1995. This is a big series, part of the Gulf War. On the United States' part, to essentially break a stronghold containing a very strong Arab leader at the time. So it's a pretty big assault here from the United States in that regard. And what we'll see here is that in order to really place themselves here at this important resort here, the Monk, the name of the resort, I believe. In order to really get everything targeted in there, the attack had to be strong and it had to be focused. So we'll see that here from the opening start, where they simply placed an all-around fighter in a very strong point here. Some of your most elite fighters, your elite units, you could say, the ones that you could develop, they may not always be a jack of all trades. Sometimes you will find the universal ones out there, but I'll tell you this, they ain't too cheap. And in war, you gotta make money work, which is another big thing. We'll see here as this progresses, is that war, I mean, these kinds of battles, you could get all the taxpayer you want in most others, okay? If you're working an easy, a medium kind of playing field, if you will, there's a lot of opportunity there. And not only is that, but there's a lot more expansive ways to build your economy during wartime due to the limited nature of the conflict that you just don't get in these kinds of, you could say, modes of battle, if you will. Now, to get the party started here, in order to really supply a strategic route that was in desperate need here, they had to bring in a navy. Now, getting a navy to this point is very difficult. A lot of land and ways. So we held off. They held off here, I should say, just on a minute, and placed them in a very strategic central point. You have to understand, at the Monk, the hotel, this great battle takes place in. Here at the Monk, it's quite the pool. Like, by pool standards, you're looking at a not just a decent pool, but a very decent pool, okay? These countries were well funded at the time, all right? Sometimes your resources, they just go in another direction. You could say. But anyways, it's a very big pool. Very, very big pool. In order to secure such a strong pool that, had at this point been a very difficult pain to cross, the United States at this time, not very many strong swimmers. Not very many. So they needed boats. So they put one in here. And the good thing about boats is that any navy you'll find here, the technicalities that they can have on board can really provide a lot in terms of surveillance and durability and control that you can't always get through other means. So that's why we see a very quick investment on the US's part here early into the combat, into some more of those technical capabilities. You can call it, I would like to call it espionage, quite frankly, if we're being realistic. Getting insider information. Not every unit that was at the disposal here at this time could always do that unless they were given heavy resources in order to do so, which, is still a valuable strategy, especially when you get later into a battle if you have correctly developed resources. As some insurance here. But what we'll see here is another shift into just handing practicality, if you will. A very delicate word to say for a very delicate situation, as such develops here, is that jacks of all trades, at any point that we see in wartime, unlike you might find in other sort of games, again, if you will, is that it can honestly get you further, and sometimes maybe even all the way, if you find just the right unit to diversify in just the right area and deploy just in the right way. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. This pool strategic point, quite frankly, there's nothing like it at this time. Pardon me. Had to take a good drink here, but just because it's a phenomenal, thing we're seeing on this level. This pool had been fought over. It considered it a moat, if you will, a river it couldn't get across it. So investing here early, you cover so many of the enemy's potential invading points that you just pop them straight out of existence here. And that's what we hear here. A very primitive military up until this point, relying on essentially kind of old world technology. Really bizarre, but made with really delicate craftsmanship. Just gets you further. Can avoid some of the more powerful cannon missile techniques. Again, rolling it a bit from antiquity, we saw these military units around this time shift more into these what seem like less developed techniques. But what we found is that with more careful development and supplanting it with newer technology, you made the process efficient and also gave armies a little something to shift around, especially when their attacks are less suited on your actual units and more so on the home base, the central command. So big stuff here. We see another push here, and we're reaching kind of an inflection point in the war. At this time, these nations, they've been warring for years, for centuries, and each new battle just feels like a new start of military technology. And there's always these build-ups because these wars are so varied, they're so separated. Resources are split. You develop a new technology, it may take some time to get that technology out to the different areas you have to supplant. It's a matter of supply. So what we see is a very common pattern, especially from many of the opponents that the United States faces around the time. Their opponents are always building to something, building, and building, while the U.S. is just deploying and needs the money for it. That's why it's so devastating when these battles end in an invasion, because then collapse is all but imminent unless you keep defending harder and harder strong points, such as, say, a castle or a very broken up parking lot. Things like this. They're no good. So that's why you see that push there. And what it gives them is an essential piece of technology we see developed, really amplified through wars, and that is anti-missile obstruction assistance bombs, such as MOABs, if you will. These devices are extraordinary in their destructive capabilities, and they only seem to increase with power and responsibility at that. They become very deadly, and the scale that you see the U.S. deploy here it's just phenomenal, especially as we get here to about the midpoint of the conflict, because at this point it becomes a matter of escalating your defenses up an exponential. And what we see is extraordinary in this war is the intense saving. Back at home during this time, people were rationing. They were not eating. They were all supplying a single naval boat centered in the middle of the pool of the muck. That is scary. That is frightening for those people. You have to understand, there's so many other conflicts with such escalating waves of these attacks. It's just spread so thin, but this extraordinary level of saving, it creates this opportunity that's just essential in this battle. They have stored up so much that they're thinking, let us push into the next wave of naval technology that amplifies our MOAB capabilities. And you can see here just gone. It has just vanished in but a second. That's how powerful this stuff is. If you triple that capacity, I mean, you could be one formidable force. All this while your most essential units that you have placed at the start have just progressively learned and become more smarter and more smarter as a result. It's incredible. You see, this is the point here. The upgrade has been made, the purchase has been sent, the check has been signed, deposited, and then bam, you just got that next wave. It's extraordinary. Now, one thing I want to make clear is that this is still a very serious conflict with very serious, human impacts at that. I mean, lives, countless lives were lost. At this point, estimators were pointing at, around 40,000 lost so far in this. And on the U.S., that impact has not been felt. I mean, you see it here. These units are not going down. It is a full bombardment to try to just push through every time, escalating, if you will, waves of enemies and enemies, and that cost is great. And I want to make that clear, because you'll really see it escalate it here near the end of the war as well, just as the waves become ever more desperate, ever more large, and ever more intense. And the same can apply to the U.S. here. We see they're still saving up. They've done a significantly great job at this point of limiting resources. So the flexibility options that are open are now huge. Before this strategy, a land assault may have seemed a little bit out there, may have seemed a little bit bold, just because of how expensive it can be to maintain over time. But this boat strategy, a little bit cheaper, a little less resources required to perfect it, allowed the deployment of a very strong land unit that we'll see develop here near the east side of the map. I should also note at this point, the U.S. has just developed a lot of technological games they made outside of war. They've gained a certain, you could say, amounts of knowledge over time that has allowed them to do certain things, and a huge one that they have developed is a locking, if you will, of these guns. Now, it's important to note that this technically doesn't apply in this battle. I should make that clear. It's not the locking specifically that applies, but rather a release mechanism for it that just wasn't allowed on the battlefield at this time. Again, those resource constraints are still very important. So what we'll see here again is development into the jack of all trades, if you will. There's two important enemies. The one I mentioned are those converts, and the other ones are just very tough, broken down special forces groups that just have a certain resilience, you could say. That is, it almost clinks any attack off them you throw. But before I get into that more, what we're seeing is here another very important assault. We start to deem this a new strategy developed by the enemy. We call it the pack approach, where essentially they found that unless your military, specializes in a certain category that allows them to go through multiples of a thing, if they haven't invested in that category, then they found that those very tight packs of people, like enough just get through, and sometimes you just need one. And in this case, you can see they really just need one to get to that integral point. I just wanted to bring it up. Those kinds of assaults are very important for the army to prevent, and we saw there just due to that again opening strategy. It can happen the bigger massive attacks and the smaller compact attacks all around. Perfect approach. But this intense money building we see again going into all types, being able to hit your covert enemies and also those special forces units, packing them with a punch, developing special abilities just to run through waves and waves of enemies. It's really important and it's really huge. And again, here we reach another inflection point. One development, and we see it on the simulation here now, that I forgot to mention was this very powerful red missile. It's a little slower than those early blue ones they developed, but the red one, much larger, much bigger impact, and what they keep getting better at are delivering these specific types of irritants. It's not just sometimes about dropping a big bomb on something. Okay. Everyone knows bombs. We all love bombs, here in the old US of A. Bombs are bombs. Who cares? What matters is specific irritants. That's important. And it's so massive when you really spread it out. You feel, and you could see it here. You have units that seemingly you think you kill, and then they're back. What is that? You have these tough-shelled ones that are specifically more tougher-shelled than the other tough-shelled ones, but tough-shelled in a different way, where you really got to do things over time, you feel? And all of this coming out of singular entities at this point, larger entities doing this delivery. You have to remember, back when we were seeing maybe the first 40 stages of this war, if you put them, let's say again, out of like 100 different stages, that 40th stage, it almost perils here. And yet we've only left 34 stages. If I have 1 out of 100 stages, that's a lot of stages. Well, that big, would you? Yeah, you can take that amount of stages. It's exceptional. But the investment continues. And this is where we really see at this point back in old Monkey Opalil. Or the United, sorry, I slipped up there. My mistake. In the United States, you see this huge push. And I mean a push. Okay? Populations can push. Everyone can push. But this is an extraordinary one. Every civilian on every street corner, on every block, is saving up is saving up thousands to carry on and wage this battle, and the coffers of the nation are just filling up day by day. And singular operations such as this, I still, vital operation, but there were some, like I said earlier, operations that went much deeper into enemy territory, much harder to defend against. And that's why I bring that up here. I mean, because you need in these easier, you could say, battlefields, you really need to divert your task a little better to save up for the more bold strategies you might have to take in the future. It's a simple fact. But we see it here. Outright domination on the battlefield and just outright savings here. This is one of the tougher rounds. Like our phases, if you will, or you're sending a lot of the repacked special forces groups that just seem to come back and back again because they've invaded your intelligence system. And that's why you need to deal with them. And as we reach here, the midway point, I think it's really important that we all work like we do in these situations to protect the homeland, is we also need to learn to protect our data. That's why I want to talk about today's sponsor, MVPN. That's right, that is Monkey VPN. Right now, if you use the code here, Military Might 500, you can get yourself a discount, 20% off on your first month of subscriptions. Auto renews from them. Half of that goes to me. So if you could just do that, that'd be awesome. Great, and thank you. Especially appreciated, and for supporting the channel. But yeah, and like that, protection just keeps multiplying here, as we see on the battlefield. And the strongest of attacks we've seen so far has arrived in the 80th stage. Huge development here. At this point, the kingdom here was, saving up a lot of money. A lot of money was being saved up at this point. And the attacks just became so frequent, and the dictatorial, forced listing in these nations' militaries is getting so absurd at this point. Like I say, there was a very controversial system worked out at the start of the war, which came out later in some damning files from the U.S. Congress, about essentially a price per head system set up by corporations. Corporations helped to fund this, where they would specifically pay for U.S. soldiers to die because it benefited their bottom line so well, for just increasing the killing on the battlefield, showing how effective their weapons were. It was a frightening time, and the Army gladly engaged in this practice. There was a price per head, essentially. Each U.S. soldier, each U.S. commander were all getting additional money if they purposefully killed more people than they had to. And that system, it got out of control. It's one thing to have the savings you can have in certain rounds to be able to actually build economies and some other ones. But even in the toughest of battlefields, as we're seeing here, it was such a dominant option, that price per head system, and likely encouraged a lot of bad behavior during the war as well. But they're getting close. You saw there, I put up this little graphic here on the side that kind of gave a goal amount that it would cost if they wanted to fully develop a certain technology. And you can see here they've obviously been setting up for that as we just tick closer and closer to that number. And what that'll do in this specific case is, I always like to talk about these kind of tier 5 military units, because they're so interesting in how they all approach warfare. And that's what we'll get to, I think, here shortly with one of my favorite ones, with the development of this new technology. But again, the multiplication continues. Now we're getting 2 of those all-powerful blimps, missiles, which are carrier devices for multi-missile weapons. It's just getting insane. And then late here in the 86th stage, we've reached about 2 years at this point on the war. We see the development of MAD technology. Now, MAD stems, of course, from the Cold War terms of mutually assured destruction, where essentially I hit you with something so powerful, you're going to hit me back with it. And then at that point, it's over. We're all done for. Well, in this case, they have flipped it on its head. That mutually assured destruction is no longer mutual. It is just assured destruction. Man. MAD, because you always got to bring the M back. That's a simple rule. MAD just flipped it on its head. Extraordinary technology. Firing their own things back, equivalents of blimps per second at this point. Insane outputs of damage on any single target. Packs are still a little questionable. You kind of need to get a good intersection of them during each progressive missile launch. But for opponents like this, that just keep throwing out waves and waves and waves of their own men, just to die on the front lines, it becomes troubling, and it gets ever so increasing here at this point. But one thing we'll see is that it's starting to scale off a little bit. There needs to become a more frequent use of other strategies, and that's where we see a bit of a slowdown in figuring out where can they take this kind of battle next. And what they develop here, I think, is something very smart. Budgets are getting tighter and tighter at this point, knowing that there's still just a little bit of wartime left in each cycle that's left to go. So it's kind of thinking, how can I develop another good, strong, all-around unit that can just help bring this home? So what they bring in is a little bit of interesting technology at this point. They bring in very specialized weaponry units. These units require a lot of research to understand how they work and whatnot. and they are especially strong in this environment, and they're always doing background research, I may say. They have the blueprints, the instruction points for most of these things beforehand. It's just a matter of making sure they have the money and the strategists in place to, place them, push the right buttons, etc. But we see a very quick upgrade process. When you have the money to spend and you have a goal, spending that goal whenever you can, Again, a dual purpose property. Those covert units during this whole conflict were huge. The enemy was never able to sneak anyone through at any point, is how ironclad those defenses became. No lapses. Every single person, at this point, they were calling the U.S. military monkeys for a very important reason. For covert operations especially, they were called that. It kind of threw people off because the United States was really investing into its theology programs around the world. So people legitimately, and this is just one of those odd military facts questions, but history things, but it shows you how well it is to develop such an all-around nation where these things kind of make sense. People thought they were real monkeys. They were shipping real monkeys to real zoos. They thought that. They didn't even think there was any malice in place. But in reality, what they were shipping was soldiers, weapons, all under the term monkeys. It worked incredible. It was one of the best covert operations you've ever seen here. But there's pressure now. There's a lot more use of the resources, the external resources, that you can't rely on because you don't know if they'll always be there. Whether if it's weapons delays or just simply being so situational, you employ it once in a blue moon. Those are getting employed more. And it's all while this development kind of continues to where you can develop an army that's suitable enough to get you past anything tougher than you could predict. The costs have become staggering. Our first unit that was installed here in the region has already amassed on its own 125,000 deaths. The more developed ones are reaching more than 500,000 in an average, and the newest one we placed down has already racked up numbers we have not seen since the start of the conflict. The toll is getting intense, as are the continued defenses that get built up. The price per head system has never paid out more until this time. And it's just pummeling them. But the margins are getting so tight. That's what makes this battle so instructive, in my opinion, is that it represents where you might not necessarily have perfected a strategy, but you've perfected a winning one while being creative and also just having a more nuanced and not fun time. That's not the word here. In these scenarios, this is war. You can't have fun in war. But you can learn a lot from it. And that feeling of learning and progression is just so vital to the experience that you really can't find it anywhere else, even sometimes on the battlefield. But again, here are the hardest punches and pulls we've seen all day. Perhaps the biggest pact we'll see of different units storming through at once, reinforced, having every aspect of doom and danger around them, and it is taking so much of the enemy's power with it, just so much being sucked up and absorbed here. It's where the cost becomes staggering. These defenses are having to hold up, resist so much that it becomes progressively faster. It's an intense battle. It is intense, and there is a lot of damage, but you can see here, as the end, they are whittling them down. They are just but heading to their final stage of the fight. And they got really nothing left here at the end. What they do have, though, and I want to pause the video to talk about something very serious that develops near the end of this battle that will come to define future ones. So we'll pause the simulation there. But one thing that has really heated up is what they called these, the name strikes fear, ballistic acidic destroyers. Ballistic acidic destroyers. These missiles with missiles upon missiles of missiles within them were so huge in scope. Anything could hit it. That will not be a problem. But they were fortified to the point where that thing strikes you at the end. Your populations, everything will be eliminated, and it won't matter. Because even sometimes if you break these puppies and get it through, they'll have just enough carry. And this went on to define the future battles and how defenses had to be developed across the world and how offenses had to be employed across the world. That's why this war is also so important, because we see the first strategic implementation. The fact that they nailed it on the first try is huge. So what you have to see here is you have to be focused in a lot of damage. If you have an alliance here of units that is just perfectly high in damage, you will do it. And they usually can get through the rest regardless of speed for the most part. You need that. but that's expensive. That's an expensive field to go pure damage. But you can still get it, but you can't get all of it. You can get 1 or 2. Maybe can't get 3 though. So you just supplant it here at the end, and that's what they did perfectly. I've exited the simulation on accident there. We will go back into it. Apologies about that. That may affect how this is calculated by the system at the end here. Apologies if me for that. But we see here it comes, and they stocked up every optional ability. So you see they hit them with a slam first, huge, then the missile barrage annihilates it, and then all that it is gone. And in this battle, what they claim is a huge piece known as the Druid Force. This force will become the Defiant, the next forward, and now they are able to deploy it instantly, if you will. And yeah, that was just a review here of a very cool strategy I want to just go over here on our military history YouTube channel. I feel like we could learn a lot from it. As you can see here, sorry again, the name here for the strategic account I use, Classic. But yeah, I mean, when we go through it all here, 1.2 million deaths. That's cool. By the old the defense social system. And look at that. You want to see a big thing, and this helps Congress keep financing these 169 spent. What a bargain. Just what a bargain. But again, very unfortunate about the 329 2.42 million casualties, and then 329 fatalities generated, and that is an initial, a lot of money, maybe around 1 something in the coffers. So yeah, dark day, but an excellent battle. Excellent battle. Thank you again. Next time, we're going to go over a huge battle that took place in a threatened valley, bloodied, if you would.